it's impossible to ignore what's happening with the quarantine hotel issue, and that there was this offer for ADF personnel, police could have been used, but these private security guards were instead, and it appears to have been a pretty bad mistake.
Yeah, it's very concerning, and people are now back under lockdown in many suburbs, and I think no one enjoys these restrictions, but I think people understand that it's necessary, and we're all hoping to avoid a second wave here in Victoria. I'd encourage anyone who gets that knock on the door and an ask for testing in one of those suburbs to please get tested. I think the wider testing that we can have, potentially the greater it'll help us definitely to get this outbreak under control. It is concerning. I'm glad that there's going to be an inquiry into how this came to be, because I understand a lot of people will be feeling frustrated that having lived through all of the restrictions to know that perhaps this was preventable. But right now, the task has got to be to make sure we don't end up with a second wave.
The big defence announcement has come from the government this week, of course, described as a pivot to our region. Is this just adjusting to the realities of our region right now?
No, and this isn't going to make Australia safer. In fact, it's going to contribute to increased military tensions in the region. And spending $270 billion on unnecessary weapons is just wrong, while bushfire survivors are still sleeping in tents in the Eden-Monaro. There are better ways to spend money to increase the personal security of people in this country. And when you look at what's happening in our region, the big thing that has happened since the 2016 Defence White Paper came out that said that Australia is not at risk of being invaded, is of course that Donald Trump is facing re-election. He's facing re-election. He's behaving increasingly belligerently and erratically on the world stage. And now Australia has been caught up in Donald Trump's domestic politics. This isn't a good move for Australia. There are better things to spend the money on that would increase people's prosperity at home, and it is not going to make Australians safer.
The situation, though, with Chinese aggression in this region, that's been the biggest concrete change since 2016. All the defence experts will tell you, you have to make yourself a hard target to attack. That's part of the spending here. That is, any sort of calculation any country might make on an attack on Australia, it has to be difficult to do. You've got to update your weapons arsenal. We can't be Switzerland in the Pacific.
Well, if you look at even the updated defence update to the Defence White Paper that the government issued yesterday, even they've been careful about their language, and they're not saying that there's an increased risk of Australia being attacked. What they're saying, even in that update yesterday, is that there is an increased destabilisation in our region, in large part because of how the US and China are behaving. Now, in that respect, it is the US's behaviour that has also changed, as well as China's. And in that respect, Australia's problem has been that it's been too closely tied to China economically and too closely tied to the US politically. And this repositioning doesn't do anything to carve out a place for an independent place for Australia in our foreign policy going forward.
It's very hard to do that overnight,
to make the same
I'm just going
mistakes.
to jump in there because we're limited on time. But the other thing it talks about is more relationships with other countries in the area, singling out Japan, for example, India, Vietnam as well. You can't just overnight say we're no longer having an alliance with the US. It would leave Australia vulnerable. This has got to be a broadening of our overall defence in the region, and that's what this is talking about.
Well, look, and as a small to medium power, Australia is not going to be able to outgun China. Our future, our security relies in strengthened multilateral institutions, and we should be joining with other countries, including countries in the other hemisphere who are looking with great worry at what's happening between the US and China, rather than simply aligning ourselves uncritically with one side. I am pleased that we are concerned as the Greens about China's behaviour in the region, especially in Hong Kong. We've been calling for some time for the government to extend safe haven protections, and I'm pleased to hear that announcement from the government just in that press conference that happened just then.
So what did you make of that? We've got 30 seconds on program, but it sounds like something's about to be announced here. some form of safe haven by Scott Morrison?
Good. Australia should be offering some form of safe haven and protection to Hong Kongers who need it. It's about time that the government started putting its money where its mouth is and not just letting, and that means if necessary, we may also have to have another look at the Hong Kong Free Trade Agreement and whether that's appropriate to be continued to be pursued. But it is good that finally the government's listening to the Greens and others' calls to offer some kind of safe haven to people from Hong Kong.
They might characterise it differently to listening to the Greens. Nonetheless, you seem to be coming together on this topic. Adam Bandt, thanks for your time.